I still hunt. I fly for my moose license even though I'm getting too old to be at it. I take my grandson with me. He shot his first moose the year before last with me, so he liked it, and I'm pretty well much doing what my dad did. He involved all these kids into doing things like for themselves, hunting and fishing and providing for themselves, and without having to go run to the store for everything. So we're pretty well much the same way yet. But there's a lot of families here in Kippens that are still the same way. I'm not really fussy about going down to the store and buying this. I like to, if I can buy local, like beef, quarter beef, or from a local farmer or whatever, well, I will. But rather than go down to the food center, you don't know what they got put in that, and you don't know how the animal was raised or what they ate. So, and canned food is not something I'm not really fussy on it.
Well, in those days, people lived more or less off of the land. Everybody had animals. They planted their own gardens. They fished for a living or worked in the lumber woods. But when the base came, all those things changed.
We grew our potatoes and turnips. There were 16 of us in the family. 50 barrels of potatoes. We used to go through by March. We never had a potato left. We used to call it the hungry month. Yeah, we grew everything. Onions, potatoes, turnips, carrots, all that basic stuff, that Jig's dinner stuff. And we had our own animals. You know, in the wintertime there's no electricity then. And my father would kill 4 or 5 sheep and hang them up in the shed when it got cold enough, and a couple of cows and a couple of pigs, and you have that much in barrels, salted as well. And we have a barrel of herring and a barrel of fish, codfish, and barrels of salt pork. My mother we should be all dead in our family with cholesterol problems, but we worked so hard, that's why none of us ever had a cholesterol problem. I mean, when I was 7 years old, I was up in the morning running to the barns with bucket after bucket, feeding 40, 50 sheep and the cows, and clean the barns and bringing the wood before I went to school. And my other brothers were doing all similar things. We're just like the Waltons. Everybody had responsibility, you know. But we all had our stuff. We never went hungry, and my father was a very generous man. There was a couple of families who, through poor mental health, somehow they couldn't get out to do anything. And people underestimate mental health today, because big, strong people are sitting in the house on their behind, and they do not have the confidence to go and take on a job. And people just call them lazy. But they don't know what's going on up here. You know what I mean? But anyway, we lived off the land, and my father fished, of course, and he made a few dollars. We used to buy our sugar and butter, and we used to buy sugar by the 50-pound sacks, buy a barrel of beef, a barrel of molasses, whole barrel. And when my father settled up, you didn't get paid for your lobsters back then until the season was over. You left everything at the store, because from March, when you had no potatoes and vegetables left, you had to go to the store and take up an account to charge everything until you got paid in the 5th of July for your lobsters. And you'd be surprised, the time you paid your bill, there wasn't very much left to pay by the winter stuff.
Back in the day, my father and I trapped together. I was only 7 or 8 years old when I started trapping with him. We used to trap muskrats and rabbits. I moose hunted all my life. I'd say when I left Montreal, came back to Newfoundland. That was in 1970. So from there on, I moose hunted every year up until 2 years ago. Back then, that was a major thing to support your family, you know, because like back then, there wasn't full and plenty for everybody. Like my father wasn't a farmer, but like it wasn't always easy for everybody to be supplied with a plentiful supply of meat. You know. But I got a Bobby farm right now. Like back in, say, 1970, I started keeping sheep. Then I kept cattle. Then after the cattle went, I had horses. And now I got chickens that are laying every day.
Well,
Well,
never had very
I
much.
remember a lot of things that happened, like because we had cattle and that
Yes.
stuff, and you had to use Delco was called for power, and you had to do your gardens, plant your gardens, and grow big berries and all that kind of stuff, and of course you had a lot of things to do, like carrying water and that kind of stuff.
Made hay,
And-
had to feed the cattle,
Yeah.
pick berries in the fall.
And we used to have to, what they used to do for fertilizer, for doing potatoes, doing their gardens, they let fish rot and use that for
Fertilizer.
fertilizer. When they had cattle, the cows, they used to separate their own milk and make butter and cream and what was left off the water, off the
Right.
the cream, they used it for buttermilk.
Well, what happened, we used to have gardens like in the big field, what I was just telling you about, the plot of land. And there used to be gardens they'd have, and they'd mend the gardens like potatoes, carrots, and things like that. And it ended up that that's how we used to harvest our own vegetables and hunting. My grandfather used to do a lot of hunting, and certainly moose and caribou and stuff like that, right? And we always had plenty of meat and stuff like that, yeah. I used to hunt a few years back.
You know, we had a lot of cattle here. We had we had a little farm, like, for sure, because we had 6 cows and a horse, and of course we had sheep and hens too. So all that kept us busy, and we used to deliver milk because 6 cows. We delivered milk here in Kippens for a nice while, nice few years, and quart bottles, you know, and 25 cents a quart we used to sell the milk.
It was imperative that we have food for the winter because we were poor, right? And we picked berries. We picked berries, partridge berries, blueberries, and raspberries, and squash berries, and trash berries. Every berry that we can come up with, and what we didn't bottle, the partridge berries especially, we stored them in a barrel, a wooden barrel, in water. So you want to feed the partridge berries, you went out with a bowl and then put holes into it and or a screen, right, and swooped out because a lot of them floated, right. So that was the berries, and we fishing, and we fished along the shore. You know, codfish was a pretty applicable then, so we got codfish and we dried codfish and hung up the codfish in the shed. Then I spend my adolescent years cutting wood. And not myself cutting it, but I did a lot of dragging wood, haul wood out on my back, right, to the truck, right, because my father had a truck, so we had to spend my weekends getting wood. And that was fish and planting, and well, it wasn't farming as such. I guess we had a fair amount of land, and we used to plant mostly turnip and potatoes.
Been hunting since, I would say I started in 65, about 21, I guess, 65, and whatever year I had a license, I went hunting, right up, and I still get a license. No, we didn't farm. My grandfather had, I guess, what we call farming Campbell's Creek, but I wasn't, my father lived on it, and they kept their animals, and they kept their hens, and grew their vegetables, and had their beef, had their pork, milk, butter. I remember all that, but we used to be up there a lot in the summertime. And now we did have, on down Negaton, we did have a bit of land, and we grew our gardens, potatoes, turnip, carrots and stuff. Sometimes we kept hens, you know. I remember all that stuff.
People were poor. They didn't have a lot of money to spend, so they spent they did what they could. They worked at whatever jobs they could. A lot of people worked fishing. Other people worked in the lumber woods. My father worked in the woods, different parts of the island. It was hard to find local jobs that would be steady. You could get work sometimes for a few months during the summer, but then winters were hard to find work. Probably 95% people around had fairly large pieces of land. People grew their own basic vegetables: carrots, turnip, cabbage, potatoes. These are the staples. So no one would go to the store to buy carrots. You had carrots and you had a root cellar, and you would keep everything in the root cellar during the winter months and that would last you until the following year. So you always made do with what you grew yourself. I can remember picking berries when I was small. We would pick squash berries, we would pick bake apples, we would pick blueberries. And again, you had enough berries to make all the jams that you needed. So you didn't have to go out and buy store-bought jam. You made your own. It was self-sufficient. You basically had to be, because people were also proud. Most people would not go on welfare. They were poor enough that they could have gone on welfare, but they refused to do so. So you did what you had, and you didn't have a lot, but you were still happy.
Putting gardens, it's mostly basic work, is putting in gardens, digging them up in the fall, moose hunt, snare a bit of rabbit, not much. Used to get a little, there's not much work around. Get a little bit. What I used to do to survive was save up for hard days, and then we use it up. The houses we build them all with local material from the forest. In my dad's day, they used dogs. They didn't keep a team of dogs, but through the community, they would borrow someone's dog, so they had probably 2 or 3 to hook in the sleigh, and they would go. Your dad would know this place, Kippens Bog in that area, and they get rabbits. There was no moose then, but they hunted rabbits, and they get enough sleigh load and come down in the winter.
Biological father did a lot of farming. He farmed. He lived on, when he moved to West Street, I'm assuming he farmed on his initial housing area as well. Mm-hmm. And when he moved back to the pond as well, when he moved to Stephenville, he had a farm. He grew vegetables, potatoes, vegetables. And the one thing that really stands out is he would always make sure there was some left out at night. So if anyone in the area needed potatoes or vegetables, but didn't want to come forth in the daytime because maybe of embarrassment or I don't know what reason, but he would leave it out in case there was somebody out there that needed something, and they would come at night and get it.
It's quite different than it is today, I'll tell you. We didn't have any, well, for a while we didn't have any running water. We had to pipe outside and you have to go to a pump and pump. We didn't have a washroom. We went out to the outhouse when we had to. There's a big difference today. Well, there used to be, we had a pig and maybe some chickens. I know my other grandmother lived next door. And of course they went fishing all the time. There was a lot more fish then than we can get now, I'll tell you.
Yeah, all our vegetables, animals, pigs, chickens, all that. We're into that, that's what we done. Most of our food come from the land.
We lived on, I guess fishing and the land, maybe, I guess we see the rabbits and some vegetables from other people. None that we grew our own because we didn't have the land to do so.